Bold Bytes, your bite-sized guide to payments.
Today, we were discussing foundational KYC, know your customer before risk does. Joining me today is the wonderful Jonathan Arjes from Ingage IT. He has been a partner of ours for about 5 years. And I'd like to introduce you all to him for those of you on the call who may not know him. Jonathan, can you just take a few minutes and share a little bit about yourself and your company?
Of course. Thanks, Stephanie. Privileged to be here. So we're an ISV and a VAR. So we both resell and produce software, and most of our revenue is attached in some way to payments. And so over the number of years as we've grown the business and worked with customers, underwriting and risk and building out the things that are necessary to get an application into the field and actually turned into revenue has become a core function of what we do every single day. We're up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we serve mostly local customers in the Midwest. And KYC is interesting. I'm excited to talk about it today with you guys because even though that's sort of a nerdy technical term in underwriting and risk, I think knowing your customer, knowing your business is just a core business principle as well. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're excited to have you here. I've worked with Jonathan and his team for years, and anytime a risk review has come through, before we even really know about it, he's already contacting us and being like, this is who they are, this is what they do, this is how they function, and this is why this is all legitimate and we can keep moving forward. And so usually risk reviews take what feels like for our team, it feels about 30 seconds long. I know it is a little longer than that, but it does feel very quick. So I wanted Jonathan to be here for that. So let's get started. I am not a salesperson. I'm going to start out by saying that. I do not have a sales bone in my body. And so I do not envy those of you who have to walk into a merchant's establishment and make a deal, start a relationship, and have the conversation. But I will tell you that from the other side, from the risk side, from the underwriting side, there's so much that you can do when you first start that relationship that will help the longevity and really take down a lot of the issues that you see during underwriting and risk and the maintenance of an account. So let's say you walk in, you meet a merchant, you start your conversation, you sell them on either your POS or your software and payments, and you get them to buy in to an industry that, if we're being completely honest, is completely nebulous. It's constantly changing. There's information that some people know that other people don't. And for a merchant, the reason that I actually started and wanted to start this conversation with all of you is that when you're looking to start a business and you're going through those checklists of, okay, what do I need? I need a tax ID. I need a location. I need to turn my lights on. I need a staff. I need inventory. Almost none of them have any type of mention to the payments industry. So a merchant is walking into owning a business with very little knowledge of the thing that's going to help them take payments and get them paid. And in the start of it, when you have a merchant processing agreement, there's about 10 to 12 points that they hit where they say, okay, you have to agree to this, you have to agree to this, and sign here. And each one of those points references a program guide. And I don't know if any of you have ever read this program guide. And if you have, you are a much stronger person than I am. But the program guide is about 46 pages long. It is single spaced. It reads so complicated. It might as well be in Sanskrit. Nobody understands what's actually going on in this. And for a merchant to take the time to read that, they're already in over their head. So you, as the salesperson walking in the door, you're making a deal and you're having them buy into this industry. But if you're only getting the very base amount of information, just the cookie cutter, well, it's going to be about this average monthly volume, this average ticket, this is how they're going to enter in their sales, no other questions, no other answers, no other understanding of how they function, then you're going to lead to more problems. So about 70 to 80% of the risk reviews that we work with on my team, they're usually due to either inaccurate or incomplete information. All restaurants don't function the same way. And if you think that they do, then you've only been to one restaurant, honestly, because there are ones that it's just counter service. There are ones where it's a sit down 5-course meal. There are ones that have private dining and catering and things of that nature. And if you're not taking those things into account, the first large ticket, the first keyed sale, the first thing that has a deposit that has a large time frame of delivery is going to cause a funding hold and is going to lead to an upset merchant. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to happen within the first 90 days of the account being boarded. And so now you have an upset merchant who just bought into an industry that they don't understand. You're the one who sold it to them. Who are they going to be mad at? They're going to be mad at you. So as I have been kind of telling you all through all of my presentations with you and my education series, we have to be the merchant's advisor. By the time they get to us, by the time they get to the processor, it's already too late. They need to be taught in the beginning. They need to understand things in the beginning. So how do we set the foundation? For years, I have heard partners say things like, well, you really don't want to give underwriting too much information up front. It can be dangerous. Why? Why not give as much information as possible up front so that everybody's on the same page? If there are deposits, the merchant knows that. They know that information. They can provide invoices and contracts and things of that nature. Underwriting will approve that information because they have examples to look at. They have an understanding of what's coming. And then when the first large ticket comes through that does have a deposit capability within it, risk is going to say, we already discussed this throughout underwriting. We're okay. Let's just confirm. Hey, I'm not going to put this account on a funding hold. Can you just confirm what this transaction's for? And now everybody's on the same page. Everybody is working together to make sure that the merchant's experience is a good one. And so by introducing yourself to the merchant and setting that foundation, you really want to be intentional. You want to be the advisor and you want to ask questions. Know the industry that you're working with. So if you're working with mostly restaurants, ask them about catering, ask them about private events, ask them if they have a website that they need to do specific for online ordering so that all of the keyed card not present transactions are in one area with one risk parameter that everyone's working with, and all of the card present transactions are in another. And that way you're separating the behavior and you're letting the merchant's account and cash flow continue with risk and underwriting perfectly fine with everything that's happening. Now, a lot of people, they have trouble with that because they're worried about pending the account. I hear this a lot in the sales world. You want to get the signature on the contract. You want to get the account onboarded and you want the processing to move over as quickly as possible because you're afraid you're going to lose the deal. But if you also are in the process gathering that accurate information, you can not only have a speedy onboarding because you're providing all the information up front, but now you're not having to deal with any of the issues that come on later. And if you're preparing and you're building that trust with the merchant, you're also building that trust with underwriting and risk with the merchant. So they're seeing what you said was going to be happening. And there's no surprises. There's no parameter flags. No one is freaking out about the fact that you said it was going to be a $20,000 monthly volume and the first transaction out of the gate was $35,000. That's not what you want. And so you're the educated ones. You're the ones who know this industry. And so if you're able to teach the merchant why you're asking these questions and why you need this information, you really will benefit and they'll trust in you that you've got their back and their cash flow and their business, their livelihood in your hands and that you're willing to take care of it. So this quote that you see on the screen, the cost of education up front saves time and issues later. It's a little bit of a paraphrase, but this actually came from the initial conversation I had with Jonathan when we were discussing doing this webinar together, and him coming and helping me discuss this topic with you all. So, Jonathan, from your experience, what does getting the foundation right during onboarding actually look like for you and your team?
Yeah, Stephanie, I do come from a sales background, so when you're with the customer, our philosophy is to focus on relational selling versus transactional selling. And so when you put that lens in front of the conversation first, you're looking at a long-term relationship. And so this is what we're talking about, right? It's what can we do to provide education and expertise and consulting with the customer, that's going to pay off over the long term, right? Everybody wants the fastest speed to revenue, and us as well, right? That's one of the things we track internally. How quickly can we turn the application and get the merchant integrated with the systems and all those things so that we can start making money? That's vital, right? But sometimes I take a step back and I look at, well, if we're not going to do everything right the proper way now, when are we going to have time to fix it later? Because having to deal with that problem later is going to encumber some other sale or some other customer interaction down the road, right? So really, it's a holistic look at how you view customer relationships. We want customers for decades, not 4 months. And so when you have that philosophy in place, you can then justify the extra time, the extra effort going on the front side. I think creating standardization around what you're doing is super helpful. So one does not equal all typically, right? So what can you do to say, this is this segment of the business, this vertical, maybe it's restaurants, this is retail, maybe we have some kind of specific, dental office, or there's these different segments that you might have in your business. And when we submit applications upstream into a large payment network, those big public companies and entities that kind of fuel the back end of that, they are at a distance to the customer, right? And they have these broad rules to protect their money. But we have the advantage of actually knowing the customer. And so this is where you can start to create your own little segments of understanding that's specific to that little niche in the business that allows you to understand what that type of merchant needs. And to not confuse the two, right? So just because the rule set up, further up in the payment network has these broad strokes, you don't want to paint with those same broad strokes. You want to be specific to that customer, and understand the nuances and help. And I think the value shows up in the relationship overall too. If you can go through all of the difficulty and all of the pain up front, that is going to pay off in the relationship long term, because you've established there's kind of this core element that you're willing to do the hard work all the way through. And it's our philosophy too, right? Like, it's the death by 1,000 cuts. I would way rather go through a big, overhaul of paperwork up front once, really work through it with them, take the time to educate and coach, than deal with 100 emails later. And I think that that's also how the customer would prefer it most times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just, in my perspective, if you're holding up the process at the underwriting level and getting all of that information up front, and you're really taking that time, you're allowing to get all the information, and the merchant's funding and cash flow is consistent. So they're still processing with their current situation, their current setup, and they're not worried about the cash flow, but they're building that relationship with you. Once they're over to the new place, if everything's inaccurate and now they're on a funding hold, well, now they're really upset. Now everything is going away from what you actually wanted, which was a strong residual aspect, a strong relationship, and building that momentum toward profit. So,
Stephanie, let me add something to that.
Yeah.
So I oftentimes I look at, from a risk perspective, how much time or money, if I'm dealing with this problem now, how much time or money would I be spending and be willing to spend to fix the problem and make it go away for the customer in order to retain or properly manage the relationship? And if you can translate that cost, what you're willing to pay, and you can put it on the front end and avoid it altogether, it ends up being worth it, right? Because you look in the future and say, man, this funding hold, would the customer leave us over this? Would they try to cancel as they're trying to onboard, right? That's probably a very expensive, painful thing.
Yeah.
That's probably worth 4 hours if that's what it really took, right? Or maybe it's worth the couple $100 for that person to sit with them and walk through it. And so sometimes you have to place yourself out into the future and say, would I be willing to pay the price in the future to fix it? And if the case is yes, then, as a business owner, you have to pay the price up front.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So how do you and your team, how do you balance through that KYC process while still keeping the onboarding process efficient and merchant friendly and everyone buying in the entire time?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a customer, I think he's been a customer for almost 2 decades. His name is Dale. He runs a multi-store business. And he told us very plainly one time, unmet expectations suck. And it's true. Everybody knows that, right? So you're not always going to know everything, right? I think there's a key principle in just stating that you don't know and being willing to go find answers. I think I don't know is a very powerful truth to be told, especially in the sales process. But setting up the expectation as best you possibly can, right? So that's in educating and training. That's in follow-ups, right? People, right? We learn visually, we learn audibly, we learn kinesthetically. Most people are visual learners. They don't always remember what they necessarily hear. So if you're on the phone or something, so taking what you've stated and restating it in writing so that you have a reference to go back to, right? And always having those multiple touch points of education is super helpful to set up proper expectations, right? And then communication, right? Communicating along the different stages is critical in helping them understand where it's at. We know the business, we know the processes, we know the statuses of what's going on, like with an application, for instance. But depending on the merchant, they might not have done a merchant change in 10 years. Or
Right.
2 years, right? They are busy running their business.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have an intrinsic understanding of the status of what's going on. So communicating every step along the way. And even if there is a problem, if there is a pend or a risk review, right? Communicating early and getting out in front of it, allowing them to know it. If there's no update, communicating anyway that, hey, we haven't heard back on this, or I'm waiting on someone else to fill this in. It doesn't leave that gap of the customer wondering, I don't know what's going on with this, right? And
Right.
That creates a sense of fear oftentimes in the customer. So, that communication, overly communicating, I think is super helpful when you're setting the foundation for what is the expectation. And then when you've gone through the process and something hasn't worked, you have to create a loop of taking the learning and bringing it back in so that you don't repeat the same problems. And this seems so simple, but it's really got to get in the DNA of, hey, we've experienced this issue and now we know. And so build a process, build a knowledge doc, host a training internally, right? Change your process so your checklist includes this thing so that you don't deal with that same problem and you save yourself and future customers the pain of dealing with an issue you've already dealt with.
Yeah, I completely agree. You learn from mistakes, you learn from problems, you learn from issues. And if you deal with it once, then let's try to not deal with it anymore. And I see so often people just making the same decisions over and over and over again, and it leading to the same result over and over and over again. And we all know what that means. And it leads to a very unhappy relationship for everybody because we can't get past that frustration. And so that actually leads me right into the next point, which is basically the maintenance of that relationship, right? Keeping the retention of that merchant. And strong onboarding is long-term relationship leverage. So if you're starting out in the beginning by getting that really, really strong foundation, as you said, some merchants might actually be have been with the same company for 10 years, might not have had a reason to want to leave, have been completely happy. So why should they really buy into your company and what you're selling and your payment strategy if they're perfectly fine and comfortable where they are? And so by providing that advisement and that kind of mentorship and that relationship right off the bat, where you're showing that you've been in business, you've been doing what you've been doing. I haven't been here. I haven't been involved, but I want to know. I want to understand. And so by using onboarding as a retention tool, not just a process, you're actually reducing all of the headaches that come afterwards. So parameter misunderstandings with underwriting and risk, funding holds, that also leads to relationship damage. And that's not just from, you know, ISV to merchant. That's merchant to everybody. That's ISO to ISV. That's ISV to processor. That's everybody involved. Everyone starts to feel that struggle if it turns into everything needs to be escalated. We're constantly in this drowning period. Everyone's in the weeds. So by being, as you said, being that genuine and honest person and being able to be authentic and say, I don't know. I would love to find out. I actually am not too familiar with your industry. So that specific question that you have, I want to get that answer for you. I learned from day one working in this industry, do not just give somebody a fake answer on the phone. You will definitely feel the wrath of that more than if you say, I'm actually not sure of that answer. I would love to communicate with my team and find that out and get back to you as soon as possible. And I think for the most part, you will see that from our support teams and from all of our internal teams, because that is what our goal is to give you the right and the accurate information, not just tell you what you want to hear. And communicating that information proactively. So there are circumstances, and I'm pretty sure every single person on this call has heard me or someone on my team say this at some point, which is I'm going to try to submit the information that you provided to get this risk review completed. It is not all of the information or the exact information that was requested from risk or underwriting in this process. So we're going to try it, but it might not work. And so therefore, we might have to revisit the fact that we will need bank statements, that we will need the invoice, that we will need the cardholder information. So we're going to let you know that we're going to do everything that we can. If it starts with you at the merchant's side saying, I understand you don't want to give bank statements, but here's why. It's not just to dig into all of your accounts and find out what you're doing and how much you paid for your equipment and your inventory and what have you. It's not about that. We're trying, risk and underwriting, they're trying to determine whether or not you're credit qualified for the transaction amounts that you're sending through. Because if these get charged back, they're going to hit your bank account first. And if you're sending $20,000 transactions through and your average bank account balance is $5,000, you are not credit qualified. So we're going to have to figure out a different way for you to be able to handle these large payments and still be able to process with us. And we're going to have to work together to get to that point. Because as I said, you all know the industry. We know the industry. And if you don't know certain pieces of information, we have so many resources. Our growth team, our sales and revenue team, our client services team, our support teams, our risk team, every single person is going to be here to help you throughout your process with your merchant, because we want what's best for you all as well. That's why we're in the position that we're in. And so that we can help try to reduce the headaches that you're all working with. And by being as upfront as you can through that communication, there's no area for surprises. The expectations are all there. We're all trying to get to the same outcome. And communicating SLAs. communicating the agreements that we have with the processor of, if you submit this, it's going to take this amount of time to get it done. It might come sooner. If we go over, it's going to be over. And that is the agreement that we're all at. And if everybody is communicating that downstream to the merchant, then they will have the understanding, and then you will start to not have to feel the pressure coming upstream, and you won't have to actually send that pressure upstream either. So in the long run, the main point of what you're really looking for with that strong onboarding is by building trust, because the trust that you can create with the merchant at the very beginning of the relationship will come through at each step of the way. It's not if something goes wrong, it's when something goes wrong. This is the payments industry. Everything is changing consistently. Ask Visa. Visa's changing our lives on a daily basis, and we're having to morph and figure out. And so instead of trying to fight against the flow and the processes that are put in place to protect merchants, to try to get everybody aligned and working together, instead of trying to buck that system, work with it, understand it, and know it so that you can prepare and be transparent with the merchant that not everything is going to go right, that not everything is going to be completely solid, that there might be more questions, that there might be more documentation needed, but that you're going to make sure that you're taking care of them every step of the way. And something that I have definitely taught anybody that has asked me any question about risk is that risk is a story. A merchant agreement is numbers, it's data. And to an underwriter, it is a sheet of paper with a couple of words on it, some numbers, they decide whether or not it's okay, and they move it along. If you provide that story up front, instead of it just being a $50,000 monthly volume restaurant with 95% swiped and an average ticket of $150, and you let them know, hey, they also occasionally do large parties that have gone anywhere between $5,000 and $12,000, depending on how large they are. They also do catering. Jonathan actually worked with us and the underwriting team at the processor that we work with to discuss the fact that for a while, the underwriters and risk were demanding that we had a separate MID created for merchants, especially restaurants who do catering. And catering can be anywhere from it's a catering company, it's a full-blown catering, time frame of delivery, deposits, what have you, to large to-go orders that are keyed, are a part of their business. It's just a part of their daily routine. And we all sat on a call with each other to discuss why catering should not be a separate entity and a separate mid unless it's a significant part of their volume, unless it's a completely separate aspect of their company. If they're just doing large to-goes, that's what restaurants do. And so if you have that story and if you're able to communicate that information to underwriting and risk, you're actually giving what they need, and you're advocating for the merchant that you just brought on board, which is the best way to communicate that type of relationship. So for years, again, I've seen it all. I've been in the trenches with you all for several years. And one thing that I hear so often is, well, we're about to lose this merchant. In some circumstances, it's legitimate. Maybe it's seriously a mishap, something went very wrong, and we are legitimately about to lose a very loyal and trusted merchant because of an issue that happened. Sometimes that occurs, and I will not pretend that doesn't. A lot of times it's, well, we just onboarded them, we gave the incorrect parameters, now they're under risk review and a funding hold, we're about to lose this merchant. So is that a product of the process that risk and underwriting have in place, or is that a product of the relationship that was started? And so Jonathan, I ask you, because I have very rarely heard this come out of your mouth, what strategies have you and your team adopted that keep that trust intact over time?
Yeah, I mean, that's the worst one, right? Like losing the customer. In our daily stand-up board, we have like an account change note. So if there is a customer that has a retention risk, or maybe it's just a new ownership, a takeover, or significant change of any kind, we're making the entire team aware of it, right? So visibility and care across the organization, I think, is critical. So, our support technicians, our project managers, anybody that's in admin, everybody has a deep care for every single customer. And so they know, and we've been training them on how to discern when a customer is at that point of, there's been friction, right? You can't always see every single problem. Sometimes the same problem crops up and you didn't have a system to identify it. You have to fill that gap, right? So I think a lot of the times, when you're at this stage, you're hoping that the relationship heals this retention problem. But really, I do believe this is a part of the process being broken, right? We can inject an intentional thoughtfulness into every single stage of the customer journey so that we can avoid these things. And it's exactly what we're talking about, right? It's what, there's this book I've read that I love called Upstream, and this is upstream work, right? Downstream work is measurable. There's a lot of it in front of us. It's very obvious it needs to go and get done. But the work that is upstream that we know is actually going to cause, a longer term impact, but it's kind of hard to measure. Sometimes it's hard to justify that either for ourselves or up the chain to leadership. But it avoids this statement right here, right? And so again, it's taking a step back out of the business for a minute and saying, what is the price we're willing to pay to not have to be talking about, man, the merchant's being lost, right? It's the extra care in a double check of that application so you don't have the parameters wrong, right? It's for us, one tactical thing, we receive application information into our own internal systems through an online form before we generate the applications in the actual portal tools. And so that gives our team the ability to review that information and look for gaps with the customer before it actually even turns into a drafted application that the customer could sign. Yeah. Right? So that's maybe a hyper version of control. But we're just always gap hunting for those things where the ball could get dropped, knowing that, again, anytime we can eliminate or avoid that pain for the customer is just one less part of the retention thing, because customers don't leave typically over one issue, right? Right. People don't break up over one fight. Right. It's usually a series of things that cascade and compound, and then they become overwhelming, right? Mm-hmm. So by the time we're at this point where we're talking about losing a merchant, chances are they have bumped into either a couple of really big things or more likely several small things that start to undermine the trust they have that the longevity of this relationship is going to have quality to it. And so that's where process becomes super important in making sure that you're always constantly communicating that you have value and that you have expertise, and that even when something breaks, you're willing to quickly and efficiently fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when we originally spoke, you discussed that your team adopted a kind of hive mentality where everyone's listening. The support people are listening, the sales people are listening. You're doing a regular cadence almost across the board so that every single person, if they hear it, they better be addressing it. They better be bringing it to the hive to try to understand what they can do to fix that. So how would you say that adopting that type of mentality has directly improved merchant retention?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in a business, especially small businesses like I would expect most of us to be in, equipping and empowering your team to have the responsibility that at the end of the day, the outcome for the business should impact them, individually, right? Whether that's financially through bonuses or profitability sharing, or even just their daily work, right? Like if you start losing tons and tons of customers, no matter where you are in the organization, that's going to become a painful known thing, right?
Yeah.
So it is, I think, a requirement of us, especially if you're in a leadership position, to educate and train your team to have an awareness of what they're looking for with customer friction, right? And that might be really like technical, or it might just be broad, but you've got to coach them through experiences of where they need to raise their hand and alert the team to something else, right? So we have a process internally called Tiger Team, kind of a cute name for it, right? But it's basically, hey, we think that this customer has bumped into a very serious issue, or they have stumbled across the same issue multiple times, and maybe it didn't get communicated or handled. And so now, instead of running through the process of emails and Slack chats and things like that, trying to solve the problem, the team is actually, they all come together and get the same room, and we make no assumptions over what the solution needs to be. And we go back from the beginning and we solve it as a group so that we can solve it that time in the room and not do all the back and forth, right? Again, it's avoiding all of those micro little cuts that cause pain for the customer, and really just giving them a lot of attention. And I think mostly customers are looking for an awareness that you have listened, that you understand their problem, and they need a clear path to move forward. Even if that's not an immediate solution, they need that expectation set of when you're going to call them back, of the steps you're taking to resolve it, right? And at the end of the day, where that information comes in the organization, you're probably not going to get to control. And so the more you can communicate how you as an organization handle things, clear escalation paths, clear and proper communication, it's going to give that customer, the ability to hear that information right away as soon as possible from whoever they're talking to. And I think that empowers the team as well, right? Team members want to serve customers. They probably have a super high level of care for the customer, so they want to solve it as well. And so you've got to give them the path to be able to do that. And again, like we've talked about, it's learning as well. So when an experience doesn't go exactly right, when somebody says something to the customer that isn't really how the organization or the brand wants to communicate it, train that across the whole team, right? Take the time, invest the time to review that instance, and go back through it, and always be in communication with each other about what you could do to improve. Because at the end of the day, we're going to bump into things that we don't understand, and experience is, a great teacher. And so you've got to have it in the DNA to take those experiences, learn from them, and build them back into the process. And again, save yourself and the customer in the future from dealing with that same issue.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The process of being in that relationship with a merchant is definitely, it's ongoing. It's not just you onboard them and then that's it. Hey, now we're getting residuals from you, let's move on. Each person that interacts with that merchant is a part of the process. And if you're at any point losing that type of structure, which is having the same mindset, wanting to take care, wanting to support, that is a very slippery slope. And you can really start to see the dissatisfaction that comes across, not just internally within your team, but with the merchant relationship as well. And so now that we've talked about that, setting the foundation and maintaining that relationship, you don't want to plateau there. You don't want it to just turn into, there's nothing else for us to do except for to just continue to support you. Look at what we're doing, look at how well we're supporting you and how well our relationship is going. Don't leave us. The merchant knows where they want to go, and maybe they're not really too savvy on understanding how to get there. So building toward that desired future for your merchant, moving from being just a transaction focused where it's just about residuals and just about whether or not you need something or there's an issue, to actually joining the conversation into their growth, because we all want to grow. every single one of us want to grow our business. We want to grow our books. We want to grow ourselves. We want to grow our families. We want to grow. And if you are just looking at your relationship with the merchant as I got you, I've been supporting you and that's it, then you're really going to lose out on that next step of the relationship. And when you sit down with your merchant initially, you can have that conversation, and maybe they know where they want to go. Maybe they already have an idea of opening other locations or starting online ordering. But you can also have that conversation of, I'm here if you ever have anything that comes up that you don't necessarily know how to tackle yourself. That's what we are here for. So by knowing their goals and identifying the opportunities of where you can help them with that, you can really start to build that future with them, and being proactive and intuitive about every conversation that you have. So like Jonathan does with his team, if every single touch point is a valid step and giving value to that relationship with the merchant, then you all have that capability of being able to take that foundation and consistently get it to that next level. Because if I see it in several organizations where it's very divided among sales to support to risk to file build, what have you. It's very, very divided to a point where what's happening at the sales level, that conversation, it kind of stops there. And if you are not understanding that we're all a part of this merchant's growth, you tend to see that break in communication and in relationship, because we're all trying to do something, but we don't, the support teams might not have all the information of where they're trying to go. So if you're but the sales team might also not be providing the information that we actually can do. So you're having a break in that process, and by everyone working together toward that vision, the merchant's why would the merchant want to leave you? Why would they want to take away the value that you provide, that you and your team provide, in order to go someplace else, like a toast or, something that is a high volume? It's quantity over quality. It's calling into 800 numbers as opposed to the person on the other end that is there to help and there to support you along the way. So aligning your solutions that you have with their growth opportunities helps you to really dig into that long-term relationship, and thinking in terms of, it's not just about the sale. It's not just about selling payments to you. I want to know where you are, the issues you're having currently with your current processor, with your current setup. I want to fix those issues. And then what are some setbacks that you have had with your current setup and your current processor that you're looking to get resolved? Something that isn't available in your current situation that maybe I can make available. Something that we already have as an option. Or for those of you who are also growing your own ISVs, your own businesses, where you're also headed. So you might actually have something that is coming that you could bring up, you could touch point on it. And then once they're invested in your relationship, once they're actually onboarded and you're supporting them, you can return to that conversation at the right time. So bringing that consistent cadence. And for any of you who came and joined my holiday webinar that I did in November, where we were discussing getting your merchant set up for success for the holidays, understanding that that's when large parties happen, and that's when deposits happen, and that's when chargebacks start to really come through, and getting your merchant prepared for that type of behavior that they might not be used to, having those regular cadences with them throughout the year to understand, An Irish pub is not really going to be busy around Easter, but they are going to be busy for St. Patrick's Day. So stopping in there ahead of time before their actual setup is there and ready to go, and saying, hey, is there anything that you've been needing? Is there any issues you've been having? Let's try to get ahead of them before your biggest day of the year, right? So keeping that regular cadence, not just with the sales representative, but also with the support techs, and making sure that each interaction does provide value. Because if we can be honest with ourselves, which I think we can be, most merchants need just very few things from us. They need support when it's needed, they need value in the relationship, and they need minimal friction in their daily operations. So, Jonathan, once a merchant has been onboarded, how do you evolve the relationship from simply providing payments to becoming a true partner in their growth?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about it, right? So the foundation of building trust in every instance, right? We think about trust sort of as, micro deposits in a long-term relationship, right? So the more you prove trust, the more they are going to know that you are reliable, and hopefully you end up being the call when they have a question, when they want to expand, when they have growth. I think that you really can't overstate just the communication. Like, are you talking to your customers? I mean, it seems just so basic and simple. But, again, I think we see interactions with customers maybe through your software or what you're doing. You have a connectivity to the customer, but when was the last time you really had a business conversation that was beyond the daily operation transaction, where they're going to expose, hey, this is what I'm really excited about for the future, for the growth, right? Those things typically don't just happen. You have to engineer them. And so take the touch points that you already have. This could be as simple as having a survey or a follow-up question that the team rotates through on a monthly basis if they're interacting daily or weekly with your customer. It could be more rigid, like scheduling and planning on the sales side or an account management function of, actually reaching out and making touch points and showing them, like you said, Stephanie, here's the new things we have, here's the growth we're excited about, but also just asking them the basic question, what are the plans for ABC? And there are natural touch points throughout the year. You mentioned the Irish pub, right? That is a great, very easy excuse to start talking to that Irish pub customer for that time of the year, right? So look at the interactions that you're already having, look at the interactions that are naturally occurring throughout the seasonality of the business, and leverage those things to start to mine the information that you want that helps you clue into the health of the business, right? Are they growing? Are they struggling with these things? What are they not? The other thing is, I think you can generate a network effect of being a connection point to other resources, right? Whether it's other similar businesses, so they can share, conversations about, vendors or what they're doing with, certain things that might be happening inside of the city or the industry as a whole, right? Pricing pressure, things like that. Oftentimes, those customers are going to talk to each other anyway. And so being a connection point to say, hey, I noticed you guys are struggling with ABC thing, even if it's unrelated to what you serve, let me get you in connection with this other resource, right? And that comes back to the consultant and the relational selling part of being a place where they know that they can come to for expertise and for trust. And then I think the mentality too around when we think about a sales funnel, we think this top-down process of, the customer goes through these stages, they become a customer, and the sales funnel is over. There's a company called Winning by Design that teaches a bow tie strategy, and it's more left to right. So the same funnel, right? You get them in, you mature them through the sales process, but then the middle of that bow tie is actually where you both commit to each other. One to purchase the product, one to supply the product, and it doesn't end. It goes back through another side of the funnel, and it creates a loop that's constant in the sales process. And I think, they say recurring revenue requires recurring impact, right? So when we think about that, it's like we need to always be looking at what impact or value we can bring to the business in order to justify the fact that we're earning recurring revenue from them, right? So it's having the mentality of always looking where you can provide value, no matter how big or small it happens to be. And again, you're building those little pieces little by little over a long period of relationship. It ends up making you the person that they continually go back to. And it's kind of a muscle that you have to work over and over and over again. And you're not always going to get it right. We certainly haven't.
Sure.
But if you continue to build and you continue to put those little pieces together, it's just like investing, right?
Yeah.
Invest early, invest often. If you do that with your customers, you're going to end up being a trusted place for them to come and bring, both their pain and also the things they're really excited about to grow the business.
Yeah. Absolutely. You nailed it right on the head. So to summarize, and this is across the board, start with the strong KYC and intentional onboarding. Make sure that everybody is on the same page from the beginning so that you have less friction. Then use that foundation to build trust through clarity, consistency, and honesty. And then leverage that trust deposits, as Jonathan just alluded to become a strategic partner in the merchant's growth and build that relationship from the ground up with the strongest foundation that you can find. All right. Well, that is our time. I really appreciate you, Jonathan. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you in April. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.
Bold Bytes, your bite-sized guide to payments.